Amazing Grandma's incredible journey, discover how 10 years of pain led to unexpected justice. Mabel Thornton stood in her attic, an unyielding wave of dust cascading through the beams of sunlight. Boxes were piled high, memories contained within the cardboard walls. It had been a decade since Henry's name was dragged through the mud, the man she loved suggested as a thief in a world that didn't care about truth. She felt the weight of that injustice pressing against her chest. Could she really face the beast that ripped apart her family? She had spent years accumulating information, but tonight felt different. Tonight, maybe the shadows would yield their secrets. As her heart quickened, she shifted a box labeled Old Bill Stuff. Inside, she found faded documents, official-looking letters that hinted at what Henry had fought against, what they had silenced. A flutter of hope danced at the edges of her despair, but alongside it, dread crept in. After all those years, could a woman like her take on the men in power? Could she push against the tidal wave of authority and demand justice? An anguished inner voice whispered it was futile. Am I strong enough? She asked herself. The churning in her stomach matched the chaos in her head. She thought of her children, the weight on their shoulders of all their burdens. What would they think if she faltered again? What if they watched her fail, just like they had endured the humiliation when Henry's name had been dragged through the mud? The anguish poured in waves over her. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Her thoughts swirled into a tempest as she felt trapped between the desire for justice and the fear of what revealing the truth might do to her family. The echoes of Henry's laughter haunted her as she recalled the afternoon walks they would take. Mabel, never be afraid to stand up for what's right, he used to say, his eyes sparkling with resolve. Did he see how tarnished his spirit was left behind? With trembling fingers, Mabel clutched the papers to her chest. The room felt oppressive, closing in around her. Could she continue this fight when betrayal lurked in the shadows? What if bringing light upon the past tore her family apart? Each option threatened to crack the fragile bonds they had managed to maintain. Mabel's mind raced. Could she be the grandmother who salvaged her family's name, or would she become the villain in her own story? The moments before the first confrontation pulled her down like a stone into a deep, dark pool of anxiety. All she wanted was for her children to live free of the shame that had clung to them for too long. Would this present moment be her opportunity or another crushing blow? As she prepared to step into the light of truth, all Mabel could feel was the encroaching darkness of doubt, believing this fight might shatter everything she had ever worked for. Would the truth come free, or would it remain shackled, hidden away, buried in the shadows? Mabel sat on the dusty attic floor, the clutter around her a cacophony of reminiscence. Each box was a monument to a life half-lived, to dreams deferred, and to the relentless grip of injustice that still held her family hostage. Those faded documents, now resting against her chest, were more than mere words on paper. They were artifacts of her husband's courage, artifacts that bore the weight of a decade-long struggle. Her hands were trembling, not only from age but from a surge of determination mixed with fear. With a deep breath, she negotiated with her heart, vowing to pursue this path, regardless of the terror that gnawed at her resolve. For too long, she had existed in the periphery of her own life, feeding the doubt that had nestled into her, allowing it to stifle her instincts. She rose to her feet, brushing the dust off her knees, transforming anxiety into purpose. Each movement felt like reclaiming a piece of her identity that had been overshadowed for too long. Mabel opened the first letter, her heart racing as it revealed patterns of misconduct and deception. Each line sparked a sense of both urgency and anticipation, fueling her desire to correct the narrative that had wrongly defined her family. Could she knit together the fragments of her husband's defense against a cold, unfeeling world? As she deciphered the words, the pieces of the puzzle began to align. Mabel's intuitive understanding of the subtlety of human behavior, of how fear could warp perception, had been honed throughout her life, but now it blossomed into a fierce clarity. This was not just about the past. It had become about her children's future, about breaking the chains that had held them for far too long. Mabel found herself pulled into the quagmire of emotions surging within. It was a duel of values. Would she allow fear to intimidate her dreams, or would she harness her resilience to forge a path toward reclamation? She pictured her grandchildren, their innocent faces filled with curiosity and light. She would shield them from the shadows that had long been cast over their lives. With that thought, clarity began to crystallize her intentions into focused resolve. From her heavy wooden desk, Mabel grabbed a notepad, hurriedly scribbling down a plan. She would artfully unravel the layers of deceit surrounding Henry's case. Information, she discovered, was not just power, it was her beacon of hope, a means to illuminate the fogged corridors of suggestion and innuendo. It would take meticulous efforts, but carefully connecting dots could shine a bright light on the injustices they had endured. She needed allies, people who would stand alongside her, individuals who could share her vision of justice. Perhaps there were those who knew more than they let on, tucked away in the shadows. Engaging with these individuals required her to tap into her latent confidence, transforming that lingering fear into strategic courage. Mabel envisioned making a list of local activists, journalist contacts, a network capable of lifting the story from the ground it had been buried beneath. But the darkness of doubt still lurked, whispering warnings that threatened to undermine her resolve with each step. What if her actions forced her family back into the crosshairs of public scrutiny? Would returning to the painful truth be worth the potential fallout? Even as those questions pressed down on her, another narrative simmered just below the surface, the knowledge that staying silent would certainly doom them. Then it dawned on her. This was not simply a fight for her family's honor, it was about reclaiming her own agency. The moment she recognized that battle within herself shifted dramatically, she felt a burgeoning sense of empowerment. It was time to step into a new identity, perhaps the woman Henry had always believed she could be, bold, fierce, and utterly unyielding in her pursuit of truth. Mabel's heart began to pound, exhilaration intertwining with fear as she prepared to make the first of many difficult decisions. Unbeknownst to her, the web of opposition that awaited her was more complex than she could imagine. With the dawn of a new day, she would soon discover that facing her family's past would invoke challenges she never anticipated. Would she possess the strength to confront the unyielding adversaries ahead, or would the weight of history bear too heavily upon her? As night crept in, Mabel, emboldened by her revelations, braced herself for what lay ahead. The truth beckoned, its voice growing louder, daring her into the fray. Mabel awoke to the first light filtering through the cracks in her attic, illuminating the legacy of dust and dreams. The shadows that had loomed over her for years began to recede as she rose, invigorated by her newfound purpose. This wasn't merely an exploration of her past, it was a resurrection of her spirit, a reclamation of a voice long silenced. She turned to the notepad, the ink still fresh with her ambitious plans. Each bullet point stared back at her, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. She imagined her first call, a local journalist known for uncovering hidden truths, someone who had a reputation for diving deep where others feared to tread. Could this be the ally she so desperately needed? The thought sent a thrill through her. The tentative threads of her plan began to weave together a narrative that could finally cradle the complexities of her husband's fight. As she made her morning coffee, Mabel felt the familiar weight of doubt tugging at the edges of her resolve. What if she was seen as merely a grieving widow, seeking justice for a man the world had seemingly forgotten? But then, she recalled her husband's tenacity, the way he had refused to be vanquished by the injustice that plagued him. Mabel clenched her jaw, the mere remembrance of his spirit igniting a fire within her. She would not shrink into the shadows. Finishing her coffee, she took a deep breath, emphasis on intention, and dialed the journalist's number. A firm voice answered, and Mabel plunged into her story, her heart racing but grounded by conviction. "I have documents that could shed light on a serious injustice," she stated, the urgency clear in her tone. As they exchanged information, Mabel felt an unexpected wave of camaraderie wash over her. The journalist promised to meet her that evening, and in that moment, Mabel grasped the power of her own narrative. The hours leading to their meeting turned into a whirlwind of adrenaline-laden anticipation. She meticulously organized the letters that sparked her journey, wanting to present the clearest picture possible. Each word danced in her mind, shaping her understanding of the larger unseen tapestry of deceit that had ensnared her family. Connecting the dots ignited a rush. Mabel felt competent, a seasoned detective on the cusp of exposing hidden truths. As darkness began to envelop the attic, she caught sight of her reflection in a dusty mirror, a woman transformed. The shadows that once symbolized despair now appeared like a cloak of strength surrounding her. When she left for the cafe, she walked with purpose. She visualized the journalist's probing questions, imagined the light breaking over the story that had betrayed her family for so long. Arriving at the cafe, she spotted the journalist, a sharp-eyed woman with an acute sense of justice radiating from her. Mabel took a seat, nerves twisting in her stomach, but she directed her focus inward, reminding herself of her intentions. As she shared the intricacies of her husband's case, details spilled forth like a long-repressed dam breaking. The journalist listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions that propelled Mabel deeper into her recollections. With each revelation, she felt a blend of catharsis and empowerment. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" the journalist asked candidly once Mabel concluded her narrative. The question lingered, hanging heavily between them. Old insecurities lurked beneath the surface, the shame of years spent in silence igniting an emotional fire within her. "I thought my voice would be dismissed," Mabel admitted, her eyes unwavering. "But I can't allow that fear to dictate my actions anymore." The resolve in her voice surprised even herself. It was as if she had summoned strength from the very marrow of her bones. As they delved further into strategy, Mabel began to see how this confrontation could reshape not just her family's destiny, but her personal journey toward agency. Engaging with the press, initiating conversations around her husband's case, she felt invigorated by the path that lay ahead. However, a new layer of vulnerability began to emerge. With visibility comes scrutiny. Would the very act of fighting for justice expose her family to further trauma? It was the dichotomy of her journey. Fighting back came with an immediate risk, a choice between her safety and the truth she had unearthed. Just as the conversation shifted toward actionable strategies, Mabel sensed the tension in her chest tighten, a familiar sensation echoing doubt. She had awakened a sleeping giant, and now the stakes had become undeniably high. Determined yet apprehensive, Mabel left the cafe, a world cascading at her feet, confronting the fragments of both hope and fear. What awaited her on this public stage? Would she be prepared to face the potential adversaries who might seek to silence her once more? The journey she had just embarked upon was fraught with countless uncertainties, and yet, in the embrace of the night air, Mabel felt a longing to dive deeper. Each step she took resonated not only with determination but with the pulse of the impending challenges that lingered just out of sight. How swiftly would the tides turn, and would she be equipped to master the looming waves? Mabel's footsteps echoed as she navigated the dimly lit streets, each step ricocheting with her mounting resolve. Her mind raced, sifting through the tangled threads of her husband's unfinished story, piecing together how to articulate it in a way that would resonate with a public that had largely turned its gaze elsewhere. The night enveloped her, thick with possibility and peril. She recalled her husband's notebook, the one that had held his visions and dreams, but also the weight of his frustrations. Mabel had always been a cautious woman, guided by practicality and the need for stability. Yet now, a steady fire inside her pushed against that hesitation. The risk of exposure felt overshadowed by the urgency to enlighten others about her husband's battle, about the injustices that permeated their lives. Arriving home, she settled into the attic space that had transformed from a sanctuary of solitude into a crucible for her newfound strength. The notepad beckoned, reminding her of her initial ambitions, each ambition now standing as a beacon guiding her forward. She opened her laptop, allowing the cold blue light to wash over her, sharpening her focus. It was time to draft a publication strategy, not merely to tell her husband's story but to carve her own path as an advocate. As she began typing, Mabel forced herself to confront the question that loomed silently in her mind. What if, despite her determination, she faltered in this public arena? What if she couldn't shoulder the weight of scrutiny? But before she could spiral, she paused and tapped pensively on the keyboard. The truth of her experiences poured out: a mother's love, a widow's heartbreak, an advocate's resolve. Each sentence transformed her insecurities into resolve: a grave injustice must be illuminated, regardless of the personal cost. She characterized her husband's spirit as fiercely unwavering and intertwined it with her own evolving identity, a woman ready to become the voice he never received. Mabel understood that legitimacy lay not solely in expertise but in lived experience, a truth that wrapped around her like armor. Days passed as she honed her message and meticulously arranged interviews. She scheduled meetings with local advocacy groups, reaching out to lawyers, and strategizing how to maintain her family's safety while pushing for transparency. With every call and every meeting crafted, Mabel shifted from a passive observer of her life to an active participant, a player on a board she had once felt excluded from. Yet, with each accomplishment, a new layer of unease unfurled within her. The unsettling weight of people questioning her motivations or dismissing her as a mere grieving widow thrummed in her reality. The nights grew longer, laden with her thoughts, especially when her phone chimed with new notifications. Headlines flashed across her mind, the very real implication of speaking out against unseen adversaries. Who would listen? Were there those who might push back harder against her claims, shifting from shadows to front lines in an adversarial role? The next day brought an unexpected opportunity. A renowned lawyer who specialized in wrongful death cases reached out after her initial publication made waves. He wanted to help amplify her story. Mabel couldn't deny the surge of exhilaration, tinged with apprehension. She had always believed she could navigate this journey alone, but was it time to accept that she might need allies? As they discussed strategy, she was compelled to reconcile her fears with the new realities of working alongside an expert. Could she trust anyone else with her narrative? Would collaboration dilute her voice? Mabel's heart raced as she stared out the window, watching the world continue in its frenetic pace. There would be no turning back, the tides had indeed begun to turn. Her next step could reshape everything. In that moment, she questioned both her alliances and her grit. Would she stand resolute, or would doubts claw back again as the stakes escalated? Her reflection wasn't just a widow anymore, it was that of a rising beacon ready to challenge the irrepressible. Yet with this daring display, she understood the looming threats that deliberately sought to snuff out such light. What force would she confront next in a world that thrived on silence? The confrontation felt inevitable, an intermission awaiting the climactic act. Her heart beat in sync with her growing determination as she drew a deeper breath. The months ahead promised a turbulence rich with conflict, but one question lingered on the horizon: could Mabel harness her vulnerability as strength in the face of looming opposition? Mabel's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she wrestled with the swirling feelings of vulnerability and empowerment. As the renowned lawyer, Mr. Halvorsen, outlined the strategic approach they could take together, Mabel found herself oscillating between optimism and skepticism. The potential to transform her grief into justice sparkled like a distant star, tantalizing yet almost too bright to look at directly. What did it mean to accept help? That question nagged at her as she leaned back in her chair, her mind replaying all the times she had managed alone, behind the facade of strength. Would accepting Halvorson's support mean losing her voice? She needed to remain the core of this narrative, the authentic wearer of her pain. Let us start with outlining the major points of injustice, Halvorson said, his deep voice breaking her reverie. She shifted closer, adrenaline pulsing as they plotted the timelines and events that would need to be articulated. Every point he highlighted, every flaw in the system they discussed, ignited her passion but also raised unsettling questions. Every moment of deliberation offered her a glimpse into the daunting battle she was preparing for, and she took mental notes who she could turn to, what data she would need, how to frame the injustices with political acumen. Yet stark realities loomed in the periphery of her thoughts, the legal maneuverings, potential backlash, and the scrutiny that would follow her outspokenness. What would happen if the shadows of her husband's past whispered back? She had read enough news articles about whistleblowers to know that not everyone emerged unscathed from such confrontations. As Mr. Halvorson excused himself to make a call, the stillness of the attic stretched around her, beckoning her to carve out her thoughts on paper. They had agreed to meet for another strategy session next week, but Mabel's urgency demanded action now. She opened her notepad, and fair notations soon transformed into rapid-fire notes, a manifesto of her husband's journey and the systemic failures that had taken him. This was no longer just about recounting facts. It was about the emotional pulse that coursed through every sentence, every grievance she relayed. Mabel was no longer a mere layperson seeking justice, she realized she was an eloquent architect of change, framing her story in a way that would compel people to listen. Her attention turned to the social implications of their advocacy. If she succeeded, others might find their voices too. This thought simmered beneath her previous anxieties, igniting an unexpected delight. She could empower other victims to dare to speak truthfully about their experiences. The days morphed into a rhythm of physical action and introspective contemplation. Mabel immersed herself in research, gathering statistics, resources, and anecdotal evidence from others who had faced similar injustices. Each new piece of information felt like a cookie in a growing jar of resolve. The more she uncovered, the more complete her vision became. Yet with clarity came the weight of responsibility. People would hinge on her words. The fear of misrepresentation gnawed at her. What if her narrative dulled in the retelling? What if it became detached from the raw emotion that fueled it? Each time she mulled these fears, it fueled her dedication to craft a message resonant with honesty. Then came the moment she hadn't anticipated, an email notification highlighted by a message that pushed Mabel's heart into her throat. A person from her past had reached out, someone she had not spoken to since her husband's funeral, Sarah, her husband's former colleague. The brief message hinted at hidden knowledge about the circumstances surrounding her husband's death. What did Sarah know? Had her complacency about her own grief hidden insights that could stitch together new threads in her narrative? Mabel's mind raced, imagining the implications. Questions raced through her like wildfire. Could this be the key to cementing her credibility or opening up wounds she wasn't prepared to handle? Mabel resisted the impulse to respond immediately, aware that what Sarah held could alter the direction of everything she had built, for better or worse. What stories lay submerged beneath gilded words and veiled truths? If she engaged with Sarah, would she steer herself into a tempest, or might it solidify her journey? The weight of her next step was palpable, shifting her focus once again to the precarious boundary between seeking validation and commanding her own narrative. The unknown loomed before her like an open door, but some part of her hesitated to step through. Determined, Mabel prepared herself for the conversation. As her mind surged with possibilities, one question echoed through her consciousness: was she ready to face the potential fallout from stepping into the darker corners of her truth? Mabel sat at her desk, every tick of the clock emphasizing the weight of uncertainty pressing against her chest. She reopened Sarah's email, her instinct pulling her toward decisive action, but fear tugged in the opposite direction, reminding her of the pain hiding in each memory. Emotions spiraled in a dizzying dance. What would it mean to unravel another layer of her husband's history? Mabel still carried the burden of grief, as well as the anger over the injustice that besieged their lives, a potent mixture that afforded neither solace nor clarity. Taking a deep breath, she scrutinized the details of the email again. "You deserve to know the truth," it had said. What truth? And was she prepared for it? It was tantalizing but undeniably frightening. Mabel stood, pacing the room, tracing her fingers along the surface of the desk where so many thoughts had poured out in ink. Each rapid step marked the tumult within her. Would she be relinquishing control over her own narrative by opening this communication? What if the revelations altered everything she had been crafting? With newfound determination, Mabel clutched her phone and typed a response, carefully choosing her words. "I would like to know what you have to share. Let us talk." Hitting send felt momentous, as if she had ventured into an uncharted territory. A timeline to a conversation with Sarah emerged, a veritable path that melded past and present, old wounds and a glimmer of clarity. The internal narrative of doubt still churned, whispering fears about misrepresentation, but they mingled now with a burgeoning resolve to confront whatever lay ahead. Indeed, this was no longer about merely grieving her husband's loss, it was about apprehending the broader injustice that ensnared many before and potentially after her. Engaging with Sarah could unearth truths that even Mabel hadn't acknowledged, and that prospect invigorated her intent. The foundation she had begun to lay with Mr. Halvorsen felt shaky yet hopeful. Each detail she had researched thus far was not just data, they were stepping stones toward understanding. She had already absorbed testimonies from others who had bravely faced similar battles. These stories fueled her, driving home the truth that she was on the cusp of a deeper understanding both personally and communally. Days passed, the anticipation knitting Mabel's nerves inexplicably tight as she prepared for her meeting with Sarah. She envisioned their first interaction, replaying potential scenarios like a mental film reel. A casual coffee shop. A somber meeting in her living room. What if the darkness she feared echoed through each conversation, revealing layers of not only her husband's experiences but Sarah's as well? This self-exploration energized Mabel's resolve. She was ready to claim ownership of her narrative completely. In inviting Sarah back into her life, she would be standing tall amidst the rubble of both their histories. The hour approached, and Mabel donned a fierce yet composed expression. She turned her attention to her notepad from prior meetings, reading the notes she had taken with Halvorsen and adjusting her strategy to account for what Sarah might reveal. Engaging with the past was no longer just about personal catharsis, it was about advocating for a cause that transcended her own experience. As she waited, a wave of second guesses crashed over her. Was she prepared to sift through what might be submerged in their conversation? What if it endangered not only her mission but reopened her own buried scars? The impending meeting shifted the atmosphere in the room, tension coiling like a spring. She closed her eyes for a moment, envisioning a clear horizon ahead, ready to navigate whatever truths awaited her. Then a ping from her phone startled her out of contemplation, an incoming message from Sarah confirming their meeting time. The moment had arrived, and with it, the pinnacle of her journey shimmered tantalizingly in the future. No matter the outcomes, this step felt definitive. Mabel gripped her notepad, a symbolic lifeline. Tethered to her commitment, the darkness of her truth beckoned, and along with it, a path toward justice. All that remained was to step forward and embrace what lay ahead. Stepping into her vulnerability, Mabel could only wonder whether this next conversation would illuminate her path or leave her navigating through the shadows once more, and what sacrifices might still linger beyond that door. Mabel arrived at the coffee shop early, her heart thumping against her ribs like a caged bird. The familiar aroma of roasted beans swirled around her, igniting both nostalgia and anxiety. She took a deep breath, trying to focus on the moment rather than the spiraling doubts that loomed large before her. Today was not about escaping, it was about confronting the murky depths of her husband's past, and in turn, her own. As she settled into her booth, she reviewed her notes meticulously. Each detail about her research with Mr. Halvorsen felt like a tool, a means to cut through the fog of uncertainty wrapped around her. This was more than a conversation, it was her chance to dismantle the tangled web of grief and anger that had ensnared her mind for so long. When the door chimed and Sarah stepped in, unassuming yet resolute, Mabel's breath hitched. The woman had become a ghost in her life, a shared history intertwined with loss, and here they were, together in the light of day. The emotional stakes felt impossibly high, and Mabel swallowed hard. "Hi, Mabel," Sarah greeted, a mixture of warmth and tension in her voice. "Hi, Sarah. Thank you for coming," Mabel replied, finding her voice just above a whisper. They exchanged pleasantries, the initial awkwardness hanging in the air like static. Mabel offered Sarah coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she passed the cup across the table. She noticed the quick glance Sarah cast at Mabel's notepad. The recognition of shared intent flickered between them, a connection that whispered of unarticulated stories both women bore. "So, your email, what do you want to know?" Sarah asked, her tone shifting from friendly to serious. Mabel felt the weight of the question press heavily against her chest. "Everything," Mabel replied, pushing past the wave of vulnerability that nearly drowned her. "I want to understand what happened, not just for me, but for anyone left behind, for the truth." Sarah's gaze fell briefly, and in that moment, Mabel could see the pain reflected in her eyes. The grief lingered, a silent specter that had haunted them both. "It's complicated," Sarah started hesitantly. "There's a lot I've carried, too. Your husband, he faced challenges I never fully understood until it was too late." Mabel leaned in, heart racing. This was it. Here was the chance to connect the pieces of a puzzle that had long haunted her existence. "The truth, it's in the details, right? I need to know the realities behind all of it, the struggles." The words felt like a call to arms, igniting a flicker of courage within her. Mabel understood that the revelations they would share could lead her to healing or deeper heartache. She was prepared for both. Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers twisting nervously around the handle of her cup. "He was fighting battles that a part of him wanted to shield you from. There were things I wasn't able to share before." As Sarah continued, Mabel clung to her notepad, absorbing details that shattered her previous understanding. Every revelation echoed with raw honesty, exposing hidden vulnerabilities she had overlooked. Each statement was a testament not only to her husband's struggles but also illuminated paths to dismantle her own silence. Yet, with each peeling back of the layers, Mabel felt a visceral tightening in her chest, an unmistakable pang of fear about the burden of truth. With the shift of past experiences from shadows to clarity, what would it ask of her? What sacrifices loomed just beyond this revelation? "Are you ready for this?" Sarah's voice broke through her thoughts, and Mabel realized she had momentarily drifted into a fog of what-ifs. "I want to be," she answered, breathing deeply as determination surfaced from the tumult within her. "But will we have the strength to carry it?" The weight of their shared histories began to settle as they confronted truths, both personal and painful. Just as Mabel dared to dive deeper, Sarah reached into her bag, pulling out an envelope. "There is something else, the last correspondence he left me. I think it might connect everything." Mabel's heart raced, anticipation teetering on the edge of dread as she considered the implications. What depths lay within that envelope, and what shadows might they illuminate? Now, as the air thickened with uncertainty, she sensed that the journey ahead would demand more than she had prepared to give. The moment had arrived, and with it, the potential to either shatter her perception or forge it anew. With resolve, she leaned closer to the table, feeling a new narrative beginning to unfold, a narrative that could either devastate or liberate her. But as Sarah handed her the envelope, Mabel realized she would have to embrace the echoes of the past and decide who she truly wanted to be in the unyielding quest for the truth. Mabel's fingers trembled as she accepted the envelope from Sarah, its weight heavy with untold stories. She carefully opened it, revealing a letter aged and delicate, the ink slightly smudged but still legible. Each word seemed to resonate in her chest, setting off a cacophony of emotions within her. She could feel the gravity of the moment pressing down, compelling her to confront not only the words on the page but also the fear of what those words might mean. "Do you need a moment?" Sarah asked, her eyes glimmering with empathy. "No," Mabel replied, her voice steadier than she felt. With a deep breath, she began to read, her eyes scanning the lines that spoke of vulnerability, regret, and the haunting weight of unfulfilled dreams. It was her husband's voice, intimate and raw, revealing pieces of himself that she'd never known to exist. Each sentence peeled back layers of grief, exposing the grief of two lost individuals tangled in circumstances beyond their control. As she read, emotions surged like tides, crashing against the shores of her understanding. Her husband had bared his soul, admitting to choices wrought from desperation and the longing for connection. Mabel could feel the walls she had built around her heart shifting, the pain transforming from a suffocating presence to a tangible sadness she could grasp. "This isn't just about him, is it?" Mabel murmured, more to herself than to Sarah. "No," Sarah replied, her gaze steady. "It's about all of us. We share this burden whether we want to or not." Mabel's mind raced, entangled in reflections about how easily their lives spiraled into chaos, pieces lost along the way. The very foundation of her marriage, built on love, had been overshadowed by secrets that had festered in silence. In this moment, she faced the undeniable truth that her pursuit of understanding was not about seeking blame, it was a quest for clarity, for her own emancipation from the pain of the past. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope as newfound determination coursed through her veins. The struggle to understand her husband's challenges mirrored her own struggles with grief. She had lived in shadows for far too long, allowing uncertainty to dictate her choices. "Sarah," Mabel began, her voice taking on a newfound steadiness, "I need to confront the truth not just about him, but about my own fears and how they've dictated my life. I'm tired of feeling trapped by the specter of a past that doesn't define my future." A flicker of pride crossed Sarah's face, perhaps recognizing a spark of resilience igniting within Mabel. "That's the first step," she said, her tone encouraging. "It's never about the past, it's always about how you choose to move forward." The warmth of empowerment filled the space between them, transforming tension into purpose. Mabel understood the road ahead wouldn't be simple, it demanded acknowledgement of her pain and confronting the ghost that lingered. But now, armed with knowledge and shared history, she felt a surge of strength building within her. As they spoke, Mabel's resolve solidified. "I want to turn this pain into something that means something not just for me or my husband but for everyone affected. I intend to seek justice, not just for the memories but for the truths we can uncover." "What do you have in mind?" Sarah asked, her interest piqued. Mabel leaned closer, her spirit aflame with possibilities. "I think it's time we talk to others who were touched by his story. There must be more that he kept hidden, and together, we can unearth a narrative that allows healing not only for us but also for those still trapped in shadows." The conversation shifted, morphing into plans for outreach, organizing contacts of those who may help piece together a tapestry of truth. Mabel sensed a transformation within her. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance but an active participant in reshaping her narrative. As the two women embarked on this journey fueled by determination, Mabel felt the first flickers of hope ignite in her heart. But with the promise of resolution also came the daunting realization that confronting these truths might unearth deeper pain, more complexities layered beneath the surface. Just as they began to map their next steps, Mabel's phone buzzed, pulling her focus away. The screen displayed a message from an unknown number. "Are you ready for the truth?" it read. Mabel's heart raced, the uncertainty of its implications washing over her. What revelation awaited her behind that message, and could she handle another truth, however intertwined with her husband's past? As the world around her dimmed slightly, Mabel prepared for the potential storm that lay ahead. Mabel stared at the message, her heart pounding as a sense of urgency coursed through her veins. The words, "ready for the truth," reverberated in her mind, shifting her focus from the shared determination with Sarah to the daunting unknown lurking beyond the screen. Could this unknown number be a harbinger of resolution, or yet another layer of anguish waiting to unfold? "Who is it?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. I don't know," Mabel admitted, her fingers hovering over the screen, wavering between instinct and hesitation. The prospect of confronting more truths, the very essence of her quest, also unnerved her, the emotional weight pressing heavier with each second. The unknown now loomed as both a challenge and a threat. Taking a breath, she steeled herself and sent a reply, "Who is this?" It felt like a small act of control amidst the rapidly unfolding chaos. "Do you really want to know what you've been avoiding?" The response was immediate, chilling her thoughts. Between glimpses of her own burgeoning courage and fears manifesting externally, Mabel grasped the tension of her reality. Whatever the sender had to say could unravel the meticulous threads she had just begun to weave. Yet, turning back, allowing silence to reign, felt no longer an option. "Sarah," she said, her voice quaking as she reconsidered their plan. "Do we need to involve the police or someone who can help? Think of the implications here. I can't go digging into shadows without the right precautions." Sarah nodded in understanding, they shared a silent acknowledgement of responsibility. "We should at least assess if it's safe," she replied. "Your safety comes first, Mabel." Mabel felt grateful for Sarah's unfaltering support. "I'd like to meet whoever is sending these messages. That's a risk, isn't it?" "Maybe. But gathering courage to face the potential danger is what will define your path." The words settled deep inside Mabel, appealing to her newly kindled fire. She realized that the reckoning she sought required more than just understanding, it demanded grit and decisive action. They worked together to brainstorm how to approach this situation, outlining potential steps for safeguarding Mabel while allowing her to seek the truths she craved. The tension entwined with determination was palpable. "Let me make some inquiries. I have connections that might help verify the sender's information," Sarah suggested. "And you could consider talking to someone experienced at handling these scenarios, possibly a therapist or a private investigator." Mabel nodded, the weight of Sarah's suggestions anchoring her thoughts. Healing from the past required genuine confrontation, but strategic decisions would ensure her protection. As they plotted their course, Mabel couldn't shake the feeling that an opportunity lurked within this uncertainty. It could provide clarity she'd often yearned for. At that moment, resolving to own her narrative was cemented in her resolve. "You know," Mabel paused, a flicker of realization igniting a swell of self-awareness. "Every moment spent avoiding confrontation has delayed my growth. This message may bring heartache, but it could also amount to the catalyst for my liberation." A shared silence enveloped them, an acknowledgement of the power of choice laid out before Mabel. She mustered the courage blooming inside her and texted back, "Yes, I want to know." The catharsis of the decision felt exhilarating. Just as she hit send, Mabel felt the breeze swirl through the room, a gust of change, perhaps an omen. What awaited her on the other side of that exchange? Before she could ponder too deeply, her phone buzzed again, this time with an entirely different tone. "Meet me at the park at noon. You will finally understand everything." Mabel's heart raced, electricity skimming her skin. The time had come to face the unknown. Would this encounter unearth the truths that might redefine her, transforming pain into a narrative of empowerment? As the clock ticked closer to noon, the urgency to act became palpable. Her journey was about to reveal its next chapter. Mabel stepped into the park, sunlight filtering through the branches overhead like a celestial spotlight illuminating her path. Today felt monumental, a culmination of her choices, a reckoning. The air was charged with anticipation, and with each footfall, she could feel the weight of her mission pressing against her heart. She was ready to confront whatever truth awaited her. When she spotted a figure sitting on a bench, the tension coursed through her like a current. The person exuded an air of familiarity, wrapped in shadows, a sense of both safety and weariness weaving through the encounter. Mabel approached cautiously. "Are you?" She hesitated. "You're the one who messaged me?" "Yes," came the reply, and Mabel's breath hitched as she took in the sight of a man who had been a friend of her husband, someone she remembered from years past but had since faded from the periphery of her memory. "Ryan," she whispered, instant recognition mingling with disbelief. Instantly, memories flooded her, a warm smile, shared laughter, but overshadowed now by the urgency of the moment. This man had been woven into the fabric of her husband's struggles, and here he was, a thread pulled back into the light. "Mabel," he acknowledged, his gaze grave. "I know this must be overwhelming. I've been following your journey. There's a lot you need to understand about what happened." Heart racing, her resolve hardening, she sat on the bench across from him. "I want to hear everything. I need to know what you know about Henry," she demanded, the urgency flavoring her words like a spellbinding incantation. Ryan inhaled deeply, the weight of his next words heavy in the air. "Henry fought tirelessly against a system that was rigged against him. He uncovered some terrible corruption at the company he worked for, things that, if disclosed, could expose people in power." The realization crashed over her. Henry had painted the walls with his own blood in his battle for justice. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Mabel's voice quivered as she fought back the storm of emotions swirling within. "I didn't know how to approach it. I thought keeping you both safe was more important," he admitted, shame flushing his cheeks. "But I see now that silence was wrong. I can stand by while you're fighting for what is right without knowing the whole truth." With each detail Ryan unveiled, Mabel saw her world transforming. The pieces fell into place: Henry's anguished nights, the unexplained financial distress, the conversations with Sarah that had echoed deeper truths. This was no mere passing of time, this was a legacy deliberately obscured. "I wish he had trusted me," Mabel said, her words soft but firm, thick with understanding. "I needed to stand by him, not just at the end, but through every fight he faced." Ryan nodded, a solemn acknowledgement of the hidden battles that bond shared lives. "You have the power now to transform this." He leaned closer, urgency creeping into his voice. "You can expose the corruption he tried to unravel and fight for everyone else who is silent out of fear. You have the documents, the backing of those who faced similar injustices. They are waiting for a voice." A spark ignited within her. This was the moment she had long yearned for, the culmination of every agonizing doubt and every whispered fear that had threatened to consume her. Mabel realized this wasn't just about uncovering Henry's truth, it was about seeking justice for countless others who had suffered in silence. Mabel squared her shoulders, heart racing, fully enlightened. "I will do it. I will make sure that those truths come to light. For Henry, for my family, and for every person affected by this injustice." Ryan's expression transformed from one of grave concern to fierce support. "Then let us gather the evidence and stories you need. We can work together and bring this to the public like Henry intended. There is strength in numbers." With declaration echoing in her mind, she nodded determinedly. The notion of revealing the truth was both exhilarating and daunting, yet the courage she had cultivated. emboldened by the journey she had undertaken, was now palpable and driving her forward. As they began to strategize their next steps, a feeling of genuine empowerment surged through Mabel. The walls that had previously constrained her were vanishing. She felt not merely the weight of the past but the promise of a future defined by her choices. She stood up, feeling taller, more assured than she had felt in years. "This is just the beginning," she declared, her voice lifting like a flag unfurling in the wind. "From now on, I'm an agent of change." With clarity lighting her path, Mabel walked away with resolve solidified, understanding her narrative would no longer be dictated by fear or pain. Instead, it would become a story of justice, strength, and a legacy redefined, an unstoppable force pushing against the tide of injustice. This was her transformative moment, and she would carry her husband's legacy into a brighter future, a future forged on the back of truth and unwavering determination. Now, my incredible viewers, you need to subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that will inspire you to overcome your own challenges. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference in helping others see these stories. Comment your reactions and theories about Mabel's journey to justice. I want to hear your thoughts. And don't wait even one more second. Share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to witness the power of personal transformation and resilience. Every action you take supports this journey and these narratives of strength.